afternoon. I'm Carey Campbell, the National Outreach Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, and it is my pleasure to be here with you today. I'm so glad that we could join together. Really wish it could be in person. I miss seeing everyone's face, but I'm really thankful that we're still able to stay connected this way. I'm very pleased that we're joined by over 100 participants from Arizona for this really important conversation about America's role in the world, particularly at the time of COVID-19, and why leading globally impacts us here at home. We see it every day. We're living through it at this moment. This is such an important conversation, and we're really honored to be joined by your Congressman, Ruben Gallego. Before I invite him to join us on screen, I want to just tell a little bit about USGLC for those of you that might not be as familiar with us. So last year, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition celebrated our 25th anniversary. And over the course of those 25 years, we've been building a network of over 500 American businesses and humanitarian organizations, alongside other business organizations, faith leaders, military leaders, community leaders from all across the country. We've also created a bipartisan National Advisory Council that's chaired by Secretary Colin Powell. It is made up of our nation's leading experts on foreign policy and national security, including most every former living Secretary of State. In addition, we've created our National Security Advisory Council, which is over 200 retired generals and flag officers. And just as they served in uniform alongside other veterans, we have our Veterans for Smart Power initiative that also work with our National Security Advisory Council. There's over 30,000 veterans across the country who really understand the need to strengthen American civilian tools of national security. And what brings us all together is this belief that America's role in the world matters. It matters to our communities, it matters to our country, and it matters to our families, including all of you joining us today. It's our belief that strategic investments in development and diplomacy are essential in protecting our national security, advancing our economic interests, and really promoting the best of America's values. We talk about this tiny 1% of the federal budget. It's called the International Affairs budget. And it's one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments that America can make. It's sometimes called the foreign aid budget, but it is really so much more than that. It's our diplomats and embassies around the world, it's support for our key allies, and it's our programs that create jobs and open up new markets for American goods and services. It's our response to humanitarian disasters and our work to battle the root causes of terrorism. And it's our efforts to tackle global health threats like Ebola and, yes, COVID-19 and all of its variants, which really, today, it's been a wake-up call with what has happened from COVID. So this 1% is effective, it's accountable, and it's transparent, and it delivers for the American people, and it delivers for you. So we host forums like this all around the country, and what we see is that across state lines and across party lines, people want America to be engaged, and they want to be engaged. So COVID has really underscored what happens overseas affects us right here at home. And I'm really thrilled that we're going to be joined by Congressman Gallego to talk through these issues. So let me introduce your congressman that needs no introduction. He's been hard at work to address the challenges of COVID-19, both at home and abroad, and keep Arizonans safe. He's an expert on national security issues and is a dedicated public service. Before joining Congress, he served in the Marine Corps and was deployed to Iraq. And prior to that, served in the Arizona legislature. And today in Congress, he sits on the Armed Services Committee and the Natural Resources Committee. And he has been a strong supporter of advancing America's global leadership through our civilian tools of development and diplomacy. So Congressman Gallego, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Thank you, USGLC, for having me today to take part in this important town hall discussion. I do wish I could be seeing you in public together in a room and eating some really bad buffet food, but those days will come in the future. We do have to have a very important topic and discussion about what COVID-19 really has shown us about leadership or lack of American leadership on the world scale, and how it can have a real deep and lasting impact on our society as well as people's relationships with us. One of the conversations I've had with many of my friends across the Atlantic and across the Pacific, specifically, other politicians from Japan, South Korea, and Europe, the main question we had during the COVID, the crisis, I would say, in the middle of the COVID crisis, like, where is the United States? And I think one of the things that we really missed the boat on was really having an opportunity to really do what the United States does best, which is, show true leadership, bring countries together, work in a collaborative manner to actually, move towards a solution. And that was a really big mistake, I think, on Trump's part, where President Trump's part was his initial reaction was to throw up the barriers and throw up the walls and try to do a just Team America approach to COVID-19 versus, I think, being able to lead the world. I think there would have been better outcomes. I think, there would have been less people that died. And I think our position in the world would have been better in terms of people's views of us. China, whose irresponsibility, in terms of their efforts to contain the virus, caused COVID-19. But they actually used the opportunity during that stretch of time, starting around March, going all the way until January of this year, as an opportunity for them to actually ingrain themselves better with countries in Africa, in Europe, and trying to provide vaccines, PPE, things of all this nature that a lot of these countries couldn't provide, and trying to basically push us out as their, as a country friend. And it was a big mistake. We now know how interdependent we are. It was scary when I was actually trying to make phone calls, trying to get PPE for many of our doctors and nurses and first responders, how much of our PPE is produced overseas. Even some of our vaccines are very much dependent overseas, and sometimes with not great, reliable partners such as China. And even to the point where we saw like how interdependent we are here in the United States. We were relying on, we, and I say the collective we, not just Arizona, we're relying on other states to provide us PPE. We're relying on the federal government to provide us PPE. We had states, that were done with their, with their equipment, and they were, boxing it up and sending them to other states. So it's a very good example of how from the, our international alliances and relationships all the way down to states. And I saw, some beautiful things also happening, when we saw the Navajo Nation getting just, obliterated by this virus. There were many people down here in Phoenix, and I'm sure some of them were on this call, that started sending up as much as PPE as they can, started sending food boxes. And for example, once we found out that, the winter was coming to the Navajo Nation, and because of the virus, many of the Navajo could not go out and collect the wood to keep them warm, since many of these, unfortunately, many of these houses do not have, gas heating. There were the caravans of people that stocked their pickup trucks and U-Hauls with wood to carry out there. That is a good example of true relationships. And especially for a virus that just doesn't care. It has no boundary. It does not discriminate. The only thing you probably had any advantage is if you were young, but there was no, this hit people, whether you were rich, whether you're poor, whether you're first generation American or 30th generation American. And I think that, we learned a lot of lessons from that, but there's still some things that I think we can be doing in terms of COVID. And I think there's a really good opportunity for us as global leaders, the president and Congress. I think that we still have an opportunity for true collective response. The United States, in my opinion, starting with the good work that happened under Donald Trump when it came to the development of the vaccine, and now with the ramping up and the good distribution that we've seen under Biden, can really be a focus of effort for the rest of the world. Europe, for all its really good nationalized medical services, has not really had a really good COVID rollout. And one of the few things I think that we have still going for us is that people still trust the USA brand in the sense that they trust the FDA, they trust our process, they trust what the CDC says. So they know that if something has the seal of approval from us, and we have a vaccine and we have extra vaccines, we should really try to start moving those out both to Europe and to many other parts of the world, because at the end of the day, we're not truly safe, until we have full world herd immunity. And I think that's something that we have to understand. We can't just go back to our little, fence and say like, well, the United States is good, we're done. No, if South America, Latin America, and Africa, because of just bad governance, a lot of these countries just don't know how to effectively roll out vaccinations. Some of them are doing well, but some of them are not, whether it's money because it's just too expensive, or it's just corruption where only those well-connected and well-moneyed are getting vaccines. We're going to be affected because that's going to allow this vaccine to have more mutations and more variants. And what happens eventually is, because we're still an interconnected world, much like we first got COVID, those variances will come back to the United States, and then we may not, and our vaccines may not be efficient against those variances. So there's a really good opportunity for us to kind of just grasp, for us to really show that we are a world leader, and we're doing it for truly altruistic reasons. We could help set up, and this doesn't even have to cost that much money. Using our experts, whether it's from the military side or from our nonprofit side or from our private business side, the one thing the United States is really good, we're really good about logistics, and we know how to move things from point A to point B and on time. There's many countries that just don't know how to do that, don't have the infrastructure to do it, don't even have the planes to do it, nor do they maybe have the refrigerators to keep the vaccines. These types of investments, low cost investments, can have such wondrous returns on investment, both on the hard power side and on the soft power side, especially if we want to compete, in the world of global opinions against the Chinas and the Russias of the world. And even, we're starting to see some glimpses of this. We're releasing about 2 million vaccines to Canada and about 3 million vaccines to Mexico. I think this is a great opportunity for us to kind of really build on that. As we get more vaccines and we have an access, we should really have put down a strong policy about how we're going to roll this out to really start helping out the rest of the world. I think our focus should be largely in Africa and in developing parts of Latin America. I think that would have a great benefit both for the country, our country, for those countries, and again, for the world perception of the United States. This is something that does not have to be, again, does not have to be something that's led by the military. I think we should do this through the State Department. We've had a very focused foreign policy in the last 4 years that was largely led by the military. I think it's time that we move that back into the realm of the State Department, where we have the experts, we have the decades of dedication to this. And once we kind of put in those types of institutional processes to help these countries dealing with COVID, it's always going to be something we could come back to, because this is not going to, unfortunately, going to be the last pandemic, right? We're going to see this pandemic come back every year. So using our expertise and our relationships with the State Department, potentially boosting up foreign aid, not by much, but enough to actually help when it comes to COVID, can really have long-term positive ramifications now and into the future, should we get hit by the next pandemic. And unfortunately, I think that is going to happen at some point, just the law of nature at some point. But this is really, again, the opportunity that we're missing. We've come off a very low point. One of the benefits of COVID is that I spoke more to international leaders than I have in other times, because I now had the ability to just get on a Zoom and talk to the Prime Minister of Lithuania or the President of Colombia, and to hear their comments and their worries about what was happening in the world and how they truly missed American leadership, our principles, our rule of law, all these things that they had so expected and had really become reliant on for 4 years. it does prove that we need to rebuild that. I think people feel that we're moving in the right direction, but, there is this sense that at any point we could come back to what many of them thought the last 4 years was not, following American principles. So this is the time. We are the global leader. We're the global and have been the global leader for many years. And this is the time for us to really take what we have learned and the lessons, the hard fought lessons, the good and the bad from COVID-19, and really use this as an advantage to really forge those long-term relationships that we hope can't be broken by anything or any other country. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you all every year, and we'll gladly take any questions.
Well, thank you so much for setting that scene and so comprehensively. In fact, you answered a couple of questions I was going to ask, but so we certainly want to talk about other international issues as well. But I think as your comments reflected, that COVID is really on the forefront of everybody's mind. So I'm going to do a little follow-up question on the COVID front. And you may know that earlier this month, USGLC released a report called A Roadmap for Global Leadership. And it really highlights the area of bipartisanship consensus when it comes to America's role in the world. And so you touched on the importance of vaccinating all around, particularly in the developing world, and what happens if we don't. So let me dig a little bit deeper into the economic side of this, a little economic. And the International Monetary Fund estimates that the COVID-19 pandemic will cost the global economy an astounding, let me make sure I get this right, $28 trillion and lost output through 2025. Now, compare that to global health experts who have called for additional funding to invest in our preparedness to respond to, as you said, what's inevitably the next pandemic and prevent an outbreak as severe as what we see now. And they're calling for just $4.5 billion a year in order to do that. So really saying spend billions now or trillions later. Mm-hmm. So again, as you mentioned, not the last pandemic we're going to face. So if we don't do the investments in preparing for the next pandemic, what are our consequences? And why is it so important that we don't keep our eye off the ball once we get through COVID?
Well, I think I think one of the consequences people aren't pointing out is that, pandemics cause also real rifts in society. What happened during this last pandemic with the, social isolation that happened is going to cause ramifications in this country and other countries for years to come. The amount of depression, the amount of bad healthcare outcomes. I give an example, I think the rise of QAnon, the conspiracy theory group, is largely because of the pandemic, where people were socially isolated, not really getting the social interaction with people that could keep, everyone aligned and in check, at least within the norms. And people follow conspiracy theories that created a certain level of community thought and gave them an access outside of their isolation. I think there's the rise in violence you see right now that's happening all over the country. I think it's also because of this pandemic. And I think you're going to see the same thing's going to be happening, I believe, in other parts of the world. So the number one problem, its immediate problem, is that what it actually causes to society, right? Whether it's in this country or whether it's in the next country. The number two is the long-term prosperity that you're denying generations, both in here in the United States and across. And we know that long-term stagnant, incomes, or just long-term, poverty creates wholly bad outcomes, where people basically start looking for other means of stability. And if the government, and when I say government, I mean any government, is not providing stability, then people create their own stability, which is why you have, the rise of transnational terrorist organizations, the rise of, truly, almost government-like gangs in South America and Central America. You have people that are engaging in the black market economy instead of truly trying to invest themselves and trying to, bring themselves out of poverty. Because, I'll give you a good example, just the Latino community itself. Latino community, had for a while been trying to recover just from the recession of 2008. We as a community spend a lot of money, and our biggest investment were our homes. And so when our homes were taken, It also took our opportunities to start businesses because we usually use our home equity loans to start businesses, things of that nature. And then our credits were shot. So 2008, recession hits. 2009, many of us lose our homes. By 2016, many of our people in my generation, at least, of Latinos had finally regained their credit worthiness and were able to go and start new businesses, get new homes. And then COVID had just hit. And now a lot of them lost their businesses and were starting to lose their homes if it wasn't for some of the restrictions, moratoriums that were implemented by Donald Trump and by President Biden. But we lost collectively a generation of, in my opinion, of prosperity growth that was occurring in the Latino community. The Black community also faces the same thing. This is why the American Rescue Plan is really important, because we don't just want to limp out of this recession. We want to be able to surge out of the recession to get us back on track, to create the generational wealth that we've been missing. Same thing is happening all across the world. Whether it's a Latin American country or Africa, people are still working and are trying to work, and the pandemic affected them too. And even if it's not what we define as middle class wages or middle class work, in those countries they are, and the pandemic has denied them that. So another resurgence of this, 2 years from now, could be truly catastrophic for everybody. It could set us into, I would say, a long-term depression, Great Depression, that we haven't seen obviously since the last Great Depression.
So sticking a little bit with that, the economic theme that, and you were talking about how business has really just been turned on its head across the country and obviously in Arizona as well, especially when it comes to trade and exports. And this is a big deal. In Arizona alone, 780,000 jobs are dependent on international trade. So again, what you said about the interconnectivity of the globe right now. So when you also look at Arizona's economy, Arizona exported nearly $25 billion in goods overseas, and some of that to the developing world. And so, but a new study has found, going back to the vaccines, that if the vaccines aren't distributed equally around the globe, the global economy could lose $9 trillion. And developing countries, as we all know, will be hit harder than anyone. So you talked about the American aid programs and the respect that people in this country and around the world have for our aid programs. So how did those programs help Arizona recover from the economic impacts from this pandemic by helping feed people overseas and around the world, and create and open up new markets? And how does this create a more prosperous Arizona and help save jobs in Arizona?
Well, look, number one, if you just want to just look at surface, so a lot of those jobs that we lost were, tourist jobs. And, why does that matter if, a developing country, doesn't have a vaccine? Well, if the whole world economy is stagnant, we're not going to have, the tourist jobs that have been coming for a while to the United States. If you look at what's happening right now during spring training, we usually have every stadium filled, every hotel filled. Those jobs there, those are working class people, largely people of color. They're good wages, a lot of tip wages. This is the time of year they make money, right? So if we have a stagnant global economy, you're not going to have the well-off tourists that come. One of the good things that just happened recently, for example, in Mexico, not Mexico, the United States has said now that if you have a permit, now you can go all the way up to the Grand Canyon. Prior to that, you couldn't even make it to Metro Phoenix without having to get a long-term visa, right? So now we're going to have access to all of these very well-off to middle-class Mexicans that live on the northern border or further south than that. But if you look at our tech economy, right, we have a very booming tech economy. We just had an announcement from Intel a couple of days ago. We also have a Taiwanese semiconductor firm that's coming in pretty soon, or starting in a couple of years too. Those companies aren't just making those chips for American computers and American networks. They're sending them all over the world, right? And the one thing we have to get ourselves out of our minds, developing world does not mean poverty either, right? There are lots of very rich people and very big middle classes in the developing world that buy our products that, we trade with on a daily basis, and they're only going to grow. Nigeria is a good example. Nigeria is a country that is probably going to be the second largest population or third largest population within 50 years as their boom happens. Within that country, if you look at it and from very, biased point of view, people would say that's a developing country. It's a poor country. Well, in terms of GDP, it has a higher GDP than South Africa, right? With a growing middle class, with a very healthy, oil economy. And it's got, some elements also of finance, kind of all these kind of things that, we may not think are interconnected, but, that when that country really hits its apex in terms of population growth, they're going to, be able to be, I think very relevant, certainly in Africa. So why does that matter? Well, we sell our computers there. Those computers have our chips in there. And that will affect the United States, no matter what. And again, stability benefits the United States and Arizona. When the world is stable, when other countries are feeding their people, when other countries are being prosperous, we're actually doing better as a country because we get the net boom benefit of it.
So let me turn a little bit to national security, certainly your expertise,
Yeah.
and you mentioned the stability. And you mentioned earlier that one of our biggest challenges today is rising conflict around the world and weak and fragile nations. And as you said, this is something that has certainly been heightened and worsened by this pandemic. And by 2030, it's estimated that a quarter of the world's population, that's 2.2 billion people, will live in fragile or conflict areas around the world. That's an astounding number. And so you've toured as a Marine and now as a member of the Armed Services Committee, you've seen firsthand the impact that this has had. So I'm curious, does this keep you up at night? And if so, what particularly about it and how concerned are you?
It certainly does. And so I actually am now the chairman of a subcommittee called the Intelligence Special Operations Subcommittee. And part of that subcommittee, one of the areas of jurisdiction is that I deal with counterterrorism and VEOs, violent extremist or organizations, all internationally, but some of it unfortunately can cross domestically. And I find myself daily, unfortunately, in a classified room where I have to put away my phone in a special case and listen to some very scary stuff. But the common thread outside of our near peer competitors, which China and Russia, the common thread outside of those is that where we have threats is where we have fragile governments with large income inequality that people are exploiting. If you see what happened, for example, with the rise of ISIS came with a weak, fragile government that basically made the Sunnis feel as if they were not part of Iraq. They weren't benefiting from all the oil revenues or the government jobs. And the Shia armies that were the Shia Iraqi armies, so a lot of the Iraqi men and women were Shia, but were based in Sunni areas. When they were attacked, the local Sunni families did not support them, right? That's what happens when you have fragile governments. You look at, I do a lot of work in the Sahel area of Africa. It is in the countries there where they have weak governance, high poverty, that you have, Al-Qaeda in Africa growing, you have ISIS in Africa growing, you have Boko Haram really having even more power than they've had in the past. And again, that's because the fundamentals just don't allow it. If you have a weak government, you're also going to have weak security. And in my opinion, the basic family wants two things. They want security and they want to be able to feed their family, right? I guess that's part of the same thing. And they're going to find it one way or the other. Either they're going to find it through the government, which hopefully it's a democratic elected government, or they're going to find it through the strongman. And they don't care who the strongman is, and they don't care what that strongman thinks about the United States, as long as that strongman is providing security and food. And so we're going to have to keep pushing. And then, we're not so isolated in the United States to think that we're exempt from this. Now we know how interconnected we are to Central America, Latin America. There are cases in South America where we've seen terrorists attack U.S. interests. For example, in Argentina, many years ago, there was an attack on, I believe it was either an Israeli embassy or something of that nature. And that was, that was something that was designed by a foreign country, but we can't stop the chance that, there are other opportunities for them to really, grow that type of extremism down there. I think there's a very good opportunity for us to change that, because I think Central America is probably one of the last areas that we really have a stability problem. But into the future, we need to see that is an issue. So poverty breeds is a breeding ground, very fertile ground for extremism, no matter where you are in the world.
So I'm going to, sorry to jump back and forth. I'm going to jump back to another economic question, because you brought up China earlier. And I know you have frequently spoken out about the need to stay competitive with China. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, even before the pandemic, they had been ramping up their economic development with, mm-hmm. and particularly in Africa and Latin America. And so we have to use every tool at our disposal to remain competitive. So what's the domino effect? What if we don't remain competitive with China, and if we pull back from these areas, what's the problem there? How will that impact us? And how do we use our tools, mm-hmm. like the Development Finance Corporation? How do those agencies help us stay competitive?
Well, look, the bigger geopolitical problem here is that we will never be able to truly match China, because we just don't have the numbers. The way that we continually are quote unquote beating China or matching China is because we have very strong alliances, right? China has no natural ally, maybe North Korea, but even then they don't trust each other, right? We have strong alliances spread all across the world based on a joint belief in values, right? If you travel through Asia, like I have, you go to Japan, you go to South Korea, Philippines is a little iffy, but in the past we've had some really great, working relationships, Singapore, Australia. We have a great system of alliances just in Asia. Now you go into Europe and we have all of NATO, and even in Latin America, we have, a great working relationship with, Chile, with Peru, with Colombia. All these countries, are aligned to help each other out, right? Both economically and internationally. Now, what happens when you don't have friends and you don't have strong friends is what you see it's been happening to Taiwan. China has been using its relationship with other countries to really exclude Taiwan from the international world, whether it's kicking them out of the World Health Organization, trying to kick them out of all international organizations, taking away recognition. Countries are switching Taiwan and saying Taiwan's no longer a country, right? China would love to be able to do that. They would love to be able to match us on the political scale in the world, whether it's in the forms of the WTO or the UN. So how do we counteract that? So China has this, Silk Belt Road Initiative, right, where they want to basically be able to bring all of its economic relationships together and be able to run it from all the way from Europe to essentially, Beijing. And the reason that is because they feel very vulnerable about the South China Sea. They feel that if something should happen, that they could just be bottled up and not be able to, get their goods in and get them out through the Strait of Malaccas or through, through Taiwan, through the Straits of Taiwan, all of this stuff, right? So they're using their money, their ability to give loans to build, ports all over the world where they have, relationships with these countries where they build the port and they end up manning the port. And next thing you know, they end up owning the port. A good example would be Djibouti, which is, in a very critical part of transit of, what used to be the Suez Canal, and hopefully will be in soon. And they started with a joint venture agreement with the government of Djibouti. It was supposed to be turned over to the government of Djibouti, and now the Chinese own it and they're not giving it back. And strategically, by the way, it's right next to one of our military bases, and they're doing this all over the world. So how do we counter that? With all of our financial services that we can provide through interdevelopmental banks, through USAID, even through private sector private sector investments. A good example, I was talking to a Japanese diet member, and they were helping out a Cambodian company to create electric generation. And the only reason Japan was doing it was because they did not want the Chinese to be able to own the electric generation of Cambodia, because Cambodia has some very important riverways that China really wants access to. So the Japanese diet member, so Japanese congressman, worked with private banks in Japan to give money to this Cambodian company, right? So we can do that, and of course, there's ways to make sure that it is both profitable to the United States. We could hire the American engineers to go build this, right? We can build the capital from the interest on it. I certainly think that we could couple this with climate change. It is cheaper for us to actually build solar farms in Africa than it is for here in the United States. And by doing that, we also get to electrify Africa, employ people, bring stability. By the way, that's something that also, like electric stability, creates government stability also. Where the growing population of the world is going to be, which is going to be Africa, we can really stem the tide of climate change.
Well, and I wanted to ask you a question on climate change, but
there we go.
That could take a while. So I'm actually gonna hold on that one. I know we have some advisory committee members that certainly want to ask you questions. So I'm going to ask one more before we get there. And that's about something that's also in the news every day right now. And that is in the Northern Triangle. So I want to set the stage that around the world, currently 80 million people are displaced, and more than 235 million people will need humanitarian assistance this year, which is a 40% increase. Obviously, that's due to COVID, but so many other factors. And when you look at the Northern Triangle with El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and we've seen that surge of migration in recent months, and it's driven by a number of factors, from rising hunger to poverty, alongside the climate change, as we talked about, the hurricane that they had last year. So you have specifically said, and I'll quote this, is you've called for continuing to, quote, provide aid that continues in the Northern Triangle that will help reduce push factors, end quote. So why do you see this assistance in this region so important to tackle these drivers? And how does that create a more prosperous and safe, stable community in Central America?
Look, these migrations are, like you said, they're caused by a lot of things. Instability, like high crime and gangs down there. Not being able to feed your family, not being able to provide security. Job prospects are slim to none, so people move, right? And the direction they need to move, they know to move to, where they know there's jobs and stability, is north. And that's how they end up at our doorstep. Number one, it's actually cheaper for us to actually deal with this problem at its origin than it is actually at our doorstep, right? What we end up doing to try to take care of these asylum seekers, eventually refugees, ends up being pretty expensive. And now, I feel during the time of COVID, especially for unaccompanied minors, we should definitely be doing our best to take care of them. Other than that, if you're below the age of if you're above the age of 17, I think, until COVID is over, we have to figure out a way for you to apply for asylum somewhere else, just because, this is a very trying time. But in the meantime, we still need to figure out how to stabilize those countries. And there's multiple ways that we just, I think, have been missing the boat, right? Number one, trade has been also one of the, factors that's been a pull and a push down there. When the textile market left towards Asia, the Central American economy was just devastated. And we really need to go down there and help, re-engineer their economies, right? There are other things they can be producing or doing in order for them to keep them stable. I think we should be using the United States market when it comes to coffee to be able to prop up the coffee prices of Central America and try to buy more Central American based goods, just because that'll also keep a lot of the rural population employed and in their areas. And then lastly, just the transnational criminal situation is very problematic. When you have so many people without jobs, you have a lot of young men moving, around without family ties, they can become susceptible to crime. Either they are the victims or they end up joining a gang to keep themselves, basically keep themselves alive. This is why one of the things people don't understand is a lot of the migration that's happening from Central America are young boys, right, between the ages of 10 and 17. And they're leaving because they're going to be forced to join a gang at some point, and they don't want that. And they know where that ends in the end. So we have the background experience to do this. We've turned around a lot of countries through diplomatic and economic manners, more so than we've had through, by the way, through military operations. But if you look at, Panama right now is a great example of a prosperous country that's extremely stable. Colombia is a really good example too. It still has its issues, but it's extremely, well-educated in a growing population with, high GDP. Colombia is so stable that it took in 3.5 million Venezuelan refugees. Right. To note, the population of Colombia is 38 million. So they essentially took in 10% of their population in order to be good neighbors, right? So, there is opportunity for us to really, truly stabilize Central America. And I think the last thing I want to point out is if we can really turn the Northern Triangle area, we don't need to make it Switzerland, right? We just need stability there. We could really have a unified Western Hemisphere that has, liberal economic policies going all the way from Anchorage, Alaska, down to Tierra del Fuego, and really have, a true trade that will actually help all of us out. And more importantly, make us more resilient to other world trends, especially if we want to compete against the growing Chinese economic power that's happening all over the world.
I couldn't agree with you more. Plain Colombia is such a success story, and because of the aid that we provided there, they are able to do the things that they do now. What a great example.
We actually even work with the Colombians, to do a lot of training now. We used to send all the trainers into Central America, and now we actually have the Colombians go into like Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and train their soldiers and police officers and their government to get rid of corruption, because they know how to do it better, and they have more of the cultural, the cultural competency to actually do it than we can, and they do it cheaper.
Right. Just it keeps the gifts keep on coming. So let me turn now to our advisory committee members, and the first I want to bring on David Farka of the International Business Group.
Hello, Congressman.
Hey, David.
Great to see you again.
Good to see you, buddy.
Thank you for your time today, and as always, we appreciate you having it at USGLC events. U.S. and Arizona companies are critical partners to government in combating global challenges like COVID-19, with resources, expertise, technology, and that complement the work being done by governments, especially when it comes with producing and distributing the COVID-19 vaccines. How do these partnerships leverage the strengths of both the public and private sectors to make our efforts to tackle challenges like COVID-19 more efficient? And how can Arizona businesses get involved in those efforts?
Well, I think first you have to have competent governments. And I think we finally are seeing that right now with the administration. To give credit to the Trump administration, they did really well with COVID vaccine creation, but not distribution, right? Now we have an opportunity to, again, lead the world, but we need to make sure that this isn't this isn't just a government approach, right? So what have we seen that makes kind of China more successful? They have a whole government approach, or I would say a whole society approach, right? Where you have the Chinese government, you have business, and then you have Chinese society, all kind of moving in the same direction wherever they find something, right? I think what we need here is the same approach, really being led by the government and business to really go out there and kind of change the trajectory of COVID. Now, how does Arizona interplay with that? It is I don't know how many times I have to say this, but there are so many programs that are just entirely benefit from our government foreign aid program, our Department of Defense programs, our our USAID programs, and they require a lot of small businesses to provide some of the services, both whether it's consulting or whether it's the actual products. And I think one of the things that we probably should be doing, and maybe I should try to help out more, is making sure that we have our Department of Commerce, also it's very involved in this, working with the chambers of commerce all across the country, but Arizona especially, just because I'm Arizonan, to make sure that people know that this is where we need help, right? This is where you should apply for this. We need the expertise on this. Now, the good thing about Arizona is because we have a very international setting in terms of our mind frame because of our relationship with Mexico, and actually even Canada, with all the snowbirds that come here. We're probably better, we're more apt, and we're better trained than a lot of other states for this, right? If you see the relationship that our Arizona government has with the state of Sonora, right? We know how to cross lines, cross the border, get things across the border, work through red tape here in this country and work in red tape in the other country. And so in that regard, I think we do have a very big advantage out of that. But I think it has to be with just knowledge. We have to explain to companies, this is how you apply. And it's in the best interest, I think, of the government to make sure to do that, because then we create more people that actually have a higher interest in that. And a good example I would say is Honeywell was switched right quickly during COVID, from making a lot of their very profitable, platforms to PPE. And by doing that, they had a good made good relationships and had good feelings coming from the public, coming from the state government, Arizona. They exported some of that PPE to other countries. And we ended up all being better for it, and Honeywell also started getting got paid for it too. So there are really good examples that happen at the bigger scale. I think we could bring that down to the smaller scale, and I think that would be very beneficial to us. Now, a good example that what may happen, I think once we decide that we're going to move to the next phase of vaccine distribution, which I think we should, and I think the United States should do that with our expertise as a country in terms of going back and forth from Mexico, for example, with trade, when it comes to refrigerated products. I hope they're smart enough to use a lot of our Arizona trucking companies and, medical companies that operate back and forth in order for this vaccine distribution, because we know how to get down there and penetrate deep into Mexico with medical products, with storage, which is very important for vaccine distribution, and just with, bilingual, competent, medical personnel, right? I mean, we could be sending some of our doctors, our nurses down there that just know how to do this.
So we are running short on time. So we are actually going to bring on our two people at the same time to ask questions. So Congressman, if you're all right with taking two questions at the same time, let me invite Kristen Allen of Global Ties Arizona and Terrell Welch of Arizona Department of Economic Security to join.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to be here. Good afternoon, Congressman Gallego. Nice to see you. And thank you so much for your work to advance Arizona's role in international affairs. At Global Ties Arizona, we partner with the U.S. Department of State to implement the International Visitor Leadership Program, which brings hundreds of current and emerging foreign leaders to Arizona each year to participate in cultural exchange and aid fundamental U.S. soft diplomacy efforts. These international connections are so important alongside tens of thousands of international students who attend our Arizona schools each year. Immediately prior to joining Global Ties, I led international student recruitment efforts for Latin America at Northern Arizona University. These students enrich our communities, and they collectively contribute over $700 million annually to Arizona's economy. So why is it important that we continue to encourage both international visitors to come to Arizona and international students to study at Arizona schools after the pandemic ends?
Oh, wow. Oh, I mean, because it's just a plus. I mean, number one, just the cultural ties that we get to build. We get to bring other people from all around the world to learn about Arizona. We get to learn from them. I think people forget, we have a lot of visitors. We can have a lot more visitors, but when you're dealing with the United States, people are shocked when I talk to people in Europe, when I tell them that I fly back home every weekend. And when they find out that I fly 5.5 hours home, they're aghast, right? I think I did the math. And in order for someone in Europe to fly my same distance, they'd have to go from Madrid to Moscow. And I think even then, that's still not even as much as if I fly home, because my flight's about 5 hours to 5.5 hours, right? So there's a lot of people that just have not experienced Arizona, right? They don't understand Arizona, but my God, they'll love it when they get here, right? When I was talking to the president of Taiwan 2 years ago, I was surprised that how many Taiwanese businessmen have skipped over Arizona, right? They landed, they have a direct flight from Ontario, California, which is way smaller than Phoenix, directly to Taipei, right? And what they'll do is they'll land in California, and then they'll get on a commuter plane and they'll go right to Texas, or they'll go to Nevada. And one of the things I encourage them to do is to continue to come back to Arizona. And eventually we did have some delegations that came through Arizona, and with the assistance of Mayor Gallego, we were able to land that big semiconductor plant. But the fact that this very prosperous country did not have as many connections here as we possibly could, I think was detrimental to us. So one of the things I actually recommended to the president is for them to send us some students to Arizona State University, to NAU, to our Thunderbird school, and they have in the past, but I really encourage them to kind of step it up. And a lot of these students that, by the way, that are coming from these foreign countries, they're not just your run-of-the-mill students. These are the future leaders of those countries, right? So when it comes to where they're going, what they end up doing, they're either going to be in government, they're going to end up being the CEOs of major corporations of those countries. So they're going to have a fond memory of Arizona. And I think there's going to be just great interplay that could be extremely, extremely helpful for us in the future, especially when it comes to economic growth.
Thank you so much. And so, as I mentioned, we're running short on time. So if I could ask you all to keep this one quick, because I do have one closing question. So Terrell.
Excellent. Well, my question is around the whole of government, and we're veterans. We both have the opportunity to see both defense and civilian tools of engagement and action firsthand. We've seen the importance of the roles that each play as part of a comprehensive national security strategy. COVID-19 is a clear example of a national security threat that does not have a military solution alone. In fact, numerous retired military leaders and former combatant commanders have spoken out about the need for a strong global response that leverages our foreign assistance programs and our partnerships around the world. Can you speak to why a whole of government approach is so critical to combat the complex threats we face today, such as pandemics? What would be the consequences if we shortchange our civilian tools?
Well, we had to have a whole government approach because this is it's a multifaceted problem. And if you try to just have one solution to it, you're only going to solve one level of that problem, right? And so, how does that look? Well, if we only use for example, the government to do vaccine distribution, but not work with local states and nonprofits to make sure that we have the people that are out there communicating about the effectiveness of the vaccine, you're only going to have a certain amount of efficacy, right? If you have just the state government, for example, deciding where to set up their vaccine sites, but not talking to localities who actually have a lot of on-the-ground experience, you're going to have mismatched priorities. On the global scale, if you're looking at the global scale, just the fact that our competitors used a whole government approach tells us that this is probably what we should be doing too, right? And I think what we need to do here in the United States is we need to align our diplomatic efforts, which does include the military to some degree, because I think the logistics capability that comes from the military is very important. The ability to basically for us to be able to move something across the world in such a fast manner, which I think is going to have to happen with vaccines, is going to be really important. But the State Department's ability to work through the red tape and the relationships needed to move vaccines is going to be really important. Our nonprofits that have the experience of actually being able to work in these areas and distribute potential vaccines is going to be really important. And then just our for-profit companies being able to quickly turn on a dime to produce either vaccines or other necessities to push back on COVID. It's going to be important. And why does it all matter? Again, this also goes back to the variants, right? If we have too many people with COVID-19 for too long, variances occur, and then that would end up making the whole vaccine obsolete. And then we find ourselves back in the problem that we found ourselves last March.
Thank you so much. And I have one final closing question, as I mentioned. And so I'm about to ask you a very difficult thing. We have about 30 seconds to answer this question. We want to end on a positive note. What gives you hope? What gives you hope that we're going to be able to stop COVID-19 or the next pandemic, that we're going to be able to bring our economy back and rebuild it, or keep Americans safe at this time of uncertainty? And again, 30 seconds. All of that in 30 seconds.
Look, what gives me hope is, I've gone to a bunch of vaccine sites and seeing the amount of people that are volunteering just to make sure that people get vaccines. Seeing the amount of people that, again, gather firewood to drive it up to the Navajo Nation when they heard that a lot of the elderly were not going to be able to even have fire, during the cold winters, right? Seeing families like hug and hang out together for the first time after they've all been vaccinated. Seeing new businesses pop up just now, new restaurants popping up and people just trying to get back to life. It really does give me hope. I think the vaccine is important, but it's the hope that the vaccine brings is even more important in order for us to really turn around and get the heck out of this, hole that we dug ourselves because of COVID-19.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Congressman. Thank you for being here, for sharing your expertise and your insights. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. And I am now going to turn it to my colleague, Lou Wins, who is going to close us out.
Thank you so much, Carey. And first, I want to thank you, Congressman Gallego, for joining us for this really engaging conversation during this really pivotal moment in our country, and for your incredible leadership in Congress. As I mentioned earlier, you're actually my congressman and my neighbor, and it's an honor to be on screen with you here. Thank you to David, Kristen, and Terrell, along with all of our Arizona Advisory Committee members and veterans for Smart Power who joined us today. Truly, our work would be impossible to complete without all of your hard work and your dedication and your support. We're so appreciative to be joined by all of you, really to hear from Congressman Gallego about the importance of America's global leadership. And thanking your member of Congress and sharing your position is truly critical to keeping America's leadership around the world so strong, and to ensure that we're protecting our economic interests, our national security interests, and our humanitarian values. Your voice, which is just one of many in USGLC's national coalition, that really truly makes all the difference. I encourage you to take some time exploring our recent report on reports that was mentioned during this conversation to highlight a new bipartisan roadmap for American leadership and how we're going to tackle some of the most pressing global challenges. You can download that report on usglc.org, and I suggest and recommend you share those findings with some of your friends, families, colleagues, etc. And lastly, to stay up to the minute on things that we're doing here at USGLC and what's happening in DC, join our mailing list, follow us on social media, and of course, please continue joining us for these virtual events. Thanks again for all your support, for your friendship to the organization. And as always, I look forward to hearing from you, and feel free to reach out anytime, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you all. Thanks again, Congressman.